Removal. Step 1. Prepping for removal. Begin by ensuring the ignition is switched off. Set the steering to straight ahead. Disconnect the battery. Use a lifting platform that is capable of raising the body separately from the wheels. Lift the body at the lifting points prescribed by the vehicle manufacturer. Raise the vehicle. Removal. Step 2. Wheel removal. Start by removing the wheel's lug nuts. Once the lug nuts are removed, carefully take off the wheel. Removal. Step 3. Disconnecting the ABS sensor. Remove the brake hose and ABS sensor wire from the retention bracket on the strut. Next, remove the sensor from the small plastic clip at the bottom of the strut. Removal. Step 4. Removing the air strut. Disconnect the sway bar link by removing the nut holding the ball joint to the strut. You may need to hold the ball joint from spinning by placing a wrench on the two flats of the ball joint on the back side of the bracket. Open the hood and remove the 3 upper mounting nuts. Remove the 2 large bolts that hold the strut to the spindle assembly. With the nuts and bolts removed from the spindle assembly, pull the spindle outward while pushing on the strut. With the air strut removed, you can now gain access to its hose connection. Slowly remove the fitting to deflate and free the assembly. Remove the airline fitting from the air hose and discard. Removal. Step 5. Front air strut disassembly. Remove the shock retention nut from the top of the air strut assembly. With the upper retention hardware removed, flip the strut over and locate the alignment pin on the bottom of the air spring assembly. With a slotted screwdriver or other adequate tool, remove the lock washer from the locating post. Tap the bottom of the air spring with a soft face mallet to disengage the O-ring seals. The air spring as well as all the O-rings and O-ring spacers are discarded. The only thing you will reuse is the shock itself. Clean the shock of any debris before beginning the installation of the air spring. Install. Step 1. Front coil strut assembly. Place the lower seat onto the shock and fasten with the provided bolt through the alignment hole in the shock. Install the spring pigtail first onto the shock and position in the lower seat. Using a safe and appropriate spring compressing method, compress the spring until the threaded shaft is protruding through the upper mount. Lubricate the bump stop, then slide the dust boot with the bump stop over the shaft of the shock. Place one of the 2 spacer washers onto the shock, followed by the appropriate side upper mount. Install the remaining spacer washer on top of the mount and secure with the shock nut. Install. Step 2. Installing the front coil assembly. Please note, Tighten all nuts and bolts to the manufacturer's specifications during the installation process. Secure the airline out of the way in case you may want to revert to an air suspension. Ensure the spindle is outward while installing the coil assembly. Install the 3 upper mounting nuts. Reconnect the sway bar link. Install the 2 large bolts that hold the coil assembly to the spindle. Tighten the nut holding the ball joint to the coil assembly. Reinstall the sensor into the small plastic clip at the bottom of the coil assembly. Reconnect the brake hose and ABS sensor wire into the retention bracket on the coil assembly. Install. Step 3. Install wheel. Install the wheel and tighten the lug nuts to the manufacturer's specifications. Removal. Step 1. Wheel removal. Start by removing the wheel's lug nuts. Once the lug nuts are removed, carefully take off the wheel. Removal. Step 2. Relieving air pressure. The rear air spring valve block is located in the right wheel well. Removal of the inner fender well is necessary. Disconnect the inner wheel well sensor. With the wheel well removed, locate the valve block and drain the air from the air springs by loosening the yellow and black air lines. Removal. Step 3. Rear air spring removal. With all the air evacuated from the air springs, remove the lower air spring retention screw from the bottom control arm. Using a pick or a similar tool, remove the clip holding the top of the air spring onto the frame. After both upper and lower retention fasteners are removed, you can pull the air spring loose and disconnect the air line. Install. Step 1. Prepping for rear coil spring installation. Loosen and remove the height sensor pivot point on the lower control arm. Remove the lower shock bolt. Loosen and remove the spindle to lower control arm bolt and free the lower control arm. Loosen and remove the sway bar end link using a wrench to keep the ball joint from spinning. Loosen but do not remove the 2 rear bolts holding the control arm. Loosening them will allow the control arm to move more freely. With everything done properly, the lower control arm should move freely without binding. Install. Step 2. Rear coil spring installation. Install the lower spring seat onto the lower control arm and secure in place using the supplied bolts and fender washer through the hole in the center. Install the upper spring seat into the upper mount, reusing the hitch pin. If not already installed, fit the upper and lower rubber isolators onto the coil spring. Place the coil spring assembly into the upper perch, centering the upper seat. While pressing down on the control arm, slide the bottom of the spring over the lower seat. Using a floor jack, raise the lower control arm to realign the spindle, making sure the spring is securely seated. Tighten the 2 rear bolts holding the control arm. Tighten the sway bar end link using a wrench to keep the ball joint from spinning. Tighten the lower shock bolt. Tighten the spindle to the lower control arm bolt. Install the height sensor pivot point on the lower control arm. Install. Step 3. Install wheel. Install the wheel and tighten the lug nuts to the manufacturer's specifications. Install. Step 4. Finishing the installation. Lower the vehicle to standard vehicle height from the lifting platform. Reconnect the battery. It is strongly recommended that after this install, the vehicle gets in alignment for better performance and safety.